in some ways, Evgeny, I feel like we're sort of skating around a question that you and I both spend a lot of time thinking about, and one where I think we actually do legitimately disagree, which is whether these sorts of social media technologies are inherently liberating. And to me, the fact that we're able to get this dialogue, we're able to get a much greater diversity of voices coming out of Honduras, that to me suggests actually a pretty convincing case that technology really is changing how politics take place, how social organizing takes place, and those changes seem, to me, to lead to a more inclusive and participatory society. Do you think that's true, or are you more concerned about the downsides?
Well, I think right now it's mostly, a battle of anecdotes. For, every Honduras, we have a case like South Ossetia, last year, and I've written about it extensively, and I think you've commented on it as well. What we basically saw last year in South Ossetia is that, social media wasn't present on the ground before the conflict, and many blogs popped up during the conflict and, those few weeks. And there was no way for anyone to make sense of what was being said. And either party, the Georgians and the Russians, tried to very heavily influence what was being said, and I'm sure some of them actually, had their own blogs set up out of Moscow and Tbilisi, which claimed to be from South Ossetia, and which were uploading pictures and photos of damaged houses, which could not be verified by any means. So you have no idea what they're looking at, an authentic South Ossetian house damaged by a bomb, or that photo come from, a war in Chechnya, which happened, a decade before. So, and that level of intermediaries was basically non-existent. So nobody that I know of did a good job of actually verifying what was genuine and what was not genuine. On the broader questions of whether technology has a liberating effect on the population, I don't know. I'm more and more increasingly trying to analyze what's called authoritarian deliberation, trying to actually see whether some kind of deliberation, and some of it, of course, is happening in cyberspace, is actually possible in the authoritarian context. And what I'm finding is that yes, and it's actually beneficial for many authoritarian countries to encourage their citizens to deliberate, in part because it leads to better policies. It can help you have a more effective local policy in a local, regional, Chinese village. It will be very effective, but it will still not be a democracy. So what we are beginning to see is that, of course, there are ways to have a more inclusive society. So more people would be contributing ideas, more people would be trying to actually identify corrupt officials. But what it basically does is that it makes the existing dictatorship more effective. I have not yet seen a link between this more inclusive society and regime-wide democratization. And this is where I'm really getting a little bit suspicious, because I've seen cases like Russia and China where, technology is very well integrated in society. Particularly in Russia, there is no web censorship whatsoever. The blogosphere is very vibrant, but still, the many citizens are pro-Kremlin, and those who are not pro-Kremlin are participating in all sorts of local decision-making, but that doesn't really lead to anything other than making Kremlin probably more sustainable in the long term. So this is where I think we disagree. Yes, it is getting more inclusive, and I do agree that there are many more ways for people to get involved. It does not, in my view at least, it does not necessarily lead to the overthrow of existing regimes, and in many cases it actually strengthens them.
So let's respond to a couple of points in there. You and I were both incredibly frustrated by how difficult it was to get a handle on what was going on in Ossetia. And I think the question there is, where do you apportion the blame? You can blame social media because it suddenly became very, very easy for anyone to show up with some bad old Chechen war photos and say, here's what's really going on in Ossetia. You can blame social media for that. You could also blame intermediaries and gatekeepers for that. As I've been arguing throughout this, it's really helpful to have someone doing the filtering on social media. And I think what happened was we discovered just how difficult that task was. We discovered how poor we are at executing that task. And the truth is, social media probably wasn't the best window into that conflict. There probably wasn't a lot of legitimate social media coming out of it. And I think in that sense, what we may be finding is that there are situations where social media is very helpful to you. I think it's actually quite helpful in a case like Honduras. I think it's much less helpful in a case like what's going on right now in Urumqi, because there just isn't that much coming out of it. But one way or another, you'd want to have filters associated with it. I think in many ways, on your larger case, where you're arguing that Russia's got a great deal of social media, but no democracy, I'm with you. I at no point do I want to take the cyber utopian stance and say, open up the digital floodgates and liberal participatory democracy follows behind. On the other hand, I would try to make the case that having some sort of participation, even within this framework of authoritarian deliberation, may be a step in the right direction. And my hope, I guess, would be that people learn how to participate constructively, and that over time governments realize that this form of participation isn't just window dressing, but actually is a way to rule with increasing legitimacy. So I don't think it's a magic bullet. I think it's more like the sort of gradual, long, slow erosion, that comes from a river flowing over rock. But I do think in the long time, these technologies do end up being liberating because they are inherently participatory. But at this point, I think we should probably give you the closing word within this dialogue, and particularly on this topic, which you spend so much time thinking and working about.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, look, again, just to come back to what we spoke about with regards to filtering and having gatekeepers. Yes, but I haven't yet seen neutral gatekeepers or neutral filters, right? And I'm not sure they exist. So, and I'm sure, running Global Voices, which, used to be a Harvard, and probably still is, correct me if I'm wrong, used to be a Harvard-affiliated, entity.
It's an independent nonprofit now.
Yes, registered in Western Europe, right?
In the Netherlands, yep.
You would inherently get criticism that you are advancing a certain agenda. And when you do filtering, you are inherently supporting certain voices and undermining others. So, I doubt you would go and hire an openly nationalistic, Chinese editor who would only be selecting stories being discussed in the nationalistic cluster of the Chinese blogosphere. Right? You would still want to balance it with something else, or you would just, try to be politically correct. Not necessarily in the case of Global Voices, but in the case of many other aggregators which is trying to do the same. And I think it's a legitimate concern that, we are not really presenting the full picture of, what's being discussed. And again, that's not to say that Global Voices is doing a poor job, but if you look at the coverage of the role that blogging plays in the Middle East, for example. If you look at the role that bloggers play in Egypt and how that role is being portrayed in most of the American media, the message is that, those are people fighting for democracy, human rights, and basically secular values. And then you start digging deeper and you discover all sorts of weird factors like, the Muslim Brotherhood being one of the most active blogging organizations, and many bloggers who actually don't necessarily support human rights as we think about them. And then you start understanding that it's all about who gets to talk to whom. So, Western reporters and many of the Western, curators, so to say, get to talk to people who only blog in English, right? Or who speak English because they already support Western values. And talking to them, they get a certain idea about what's going on in the country, and then they project this idea to the rest of the world, which is not exactly accurate. But I think, we're both agreeing here that, it's not necessarily full objective, and often it's, a matter of sources you look at. But on the second question of authoritarian deliberation and whether it actually is inherently good, and whether it's actually, leading to anything bigger than, existing dictatorships. I actually think, the regimes themselves have understood that there are plenty of benefits from spreading technology around their countries. And in part, it fulfills many of the social functions. So if you don't have a very vibrant, civil society of sorts in many regions of Russia or China, you can be pretty comfortable online. You can get access to any of the books you like without necessarily going to your bookstore, which would, in most cases, be empty of most recent updates. You can download any movies you'd like. You can engage in any sort of discussions you'd like, and more importantly, you can actually make money sitting by your computer, having learned English, and having a very profitable online business. And I think that idea that people can actually become self-sufficient is in some ways great because, who would argue against that people are actually becoming more, better professionally developed and have more money to spend on. But then the question is, would somehow that subtract from the eagerness to engage in any sort of critical political activity, which may potentially get them into prison? And this is why I think we don't really have a full answer yet, because, if I have a very comfortable existence as an internet user in the middle of Russia, having my own little online business and earning good money and getting access to any entertainment I want to, there is maybe no reason for me to want to challenge the existing regimes, though in this particular case, Kremlin. And I think investigating that relationship between, what I call cyber hedonism and, civic engagement and eagerness to participate in politics, I think is very important. And I think we should be, engaging with these questions more critically.
Well, I think in typical fashion, we've acted like any good pair of talking heads, where our final conclusion is it's really complicated. Because these sorts of issues that we're engaging in not only have a lot of facets, but are clearly evolving in real time. And, moment to moment, if we did this in another 4 weeks, I suspect there are 3 other more political situations we want to talk to about this. So thanks to everybody for giving us the time and attention here. I'm Ethan Zuckerman, signing off.
And I'm Evgeny Morozov. Nice talking to you.
Good to talk to you, Evgeny. Take care.
Bye-bye.
See ya.